Everybody, welcome to Shifting Gears. I am your host, Clutch, and with me, very special guest, Hi-Rez Bart. Bart, great to have you on the show, my friend.
Pleasure is most certainly all mine, Clutch. Great to be here.
Well, this is a treat because you and I, now that the world knows I'm going to be there, you and I are going to be in Canada for the North American Star League Season 3 Finals, and Tribes is going to be there. Very exciting to see that. I've seen your work at PAX. I've seen your work at E3. So I first off want to take this opportunity for you to introduce yourself, give us a background of who you are, and your background in gaming in general as well.
Sure. So start off introducing myself. I am Bart Koenigsberg, a.k.a. Hi-Rez Bart. I work for Hi-Rez Studios here in Atlanta, Georgia, as I go through my proper southern pronunciation of Georgia, which is Georgia. I was hired on here at Hi-Rez about a year and a half ago as my background is in business strategy and analytics, and I got hired on to do that. After a few months, it became apparent that I actually had a history with Tribes in competitive play back from the original iteration of the Tribes series in '98 called Star Siege Tribes.
Yep, I remember those days, man.
Yes, sir. And so I was actually kind of adjusted to start a competition forum for some of the legacy players who were there, and honestly were kind of like making the forum life for like the average, just like, hey, this game's really neat, I like going fast guy, then be like, you don't know what you're missing, it's not Tribes 2, it's not Tribes 1, you know, you're an idiot, you can't shoot good, all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well, let's get these guys doing something constructive, let's talk about like a CPMA, like a pro mod for these guys. Okay, so we start this whole forum, and then that kind of basically became Hi-Rez Esports. And so that became my full-time position, was esports manager for Tribes Ascend, and now I've actually been promoted, so to speak, to community relations and esports for all of our titles. So really no difference in terms of my workload for Tribes. I'm still primarily Tribes. In fact, Smite hasn't even really started that whole process yet, but yeah, primarily working with Tribes. My background in gaming has been PC based for quite some time. I did have a stint on the console there, mostly around, in terms of competitive play, around Gears of War. Went to Meadowlands MLG back a few years ago to play in Gears 1 tournament stuff there. Besides that, I got started in casting through Heroes of Newerth, actually, through the MOBA scene.
Wow.
Was like just a passion thing that me and my older brother did. Shoutcast a few games, and that was actually one of the things that got me hired at Hi-Rez, was that I had this other skill set to fall back on outside of my business acumen. Whether or not you believe that part of the story,
well,
is up to you.
You can be a face, which is important for companies to have somebody that works behind the scenes, but it also can be a face for the company and to hype people up and get them interested. And you did a great job at PAX when I felt Hi-Rez Studios had a great presentation of Tribes and Smite. There was the first time a lot of us even saw or even heard of Smite. And I was really impressed with your voice continually being like 100%, 110% getting people involved in Tribes the whole time. So that was, I knew that you guys were making Tribes. I had played a little bit before. I was in the beta. I'd played Tribes back in the day. But, and I'm not saying this just to be nice, I seriously was very impressed with Hi-Rez's with showing. And you and I had some good conversations, and I also spoke to some other people that we're going to kind of get into in this episode to give people a better sense of what Hi-Rez Studios is all about, and kind of the pros and cons of being an independent developer and independent publisher.
Sure.
So right now, let's talk about Hi-Rez more as a company. When was the company formed?
We started, or Hi-Rez started before I was here in 05, actually, so 2005. The company was started. It's a privately funded company. It was started by our CEO to this day, a man named Erez Gorin, and he made his fortune in another completely different area, a hardware POS sales side in a company called Radiant, and his passion was gaming, and so he left that company, and actually I started up a AI research company and a gaming company. The gaming company was Hi-Rez Studios. Hi-Rez comes from Erez, who is our CEO, and it was started making a game at the time was called The Game, and The Game eventually became Agenda, which eventually became Global Agenda, which launched after about a 3.5-year, 4-year development cycle, and it was a MMO FPS, very, very ambitious game, kind of all over the place in a way. And it did relatively well. It actually is now on Steam as a free-to-play game. It's being released internationally. It still has some life to it. And that was our first product. And so we worked on that after release for about another 6 months to a year, fully as a studio. Came out with a major expansion to it called Sandstorm, and then purchased the Tribes IP and began working on that in 2010, I believe, late 2010, early 2011.
Wow.
And Tribes was about a 16-month project from inception to release.
Wow. Well, it's pretty impressive, 16 months to capture the same kind of quality of people's remembrance of Tribes and keeping the same speed, and even the disc launcher, man. I mean, it's even the sound effects, it feels like myself gaming back with like a 300 megahertz processor, just not even able to fully load the game. I had to turn the graphics down to like polygons to be able to play.
Yeah.
But how fun it was, and I remembered the buzz that the whole community had, especially the esports community, about Tribes is coming back, and this whole Hi-Rez Studios, where are they from, what have they built before, and when I was doing research, I actually got to play a bit of Global Agenda. I chose the Medic, and I enjoyed it, but I was really more excited about Tribes to come out, and when it finally came out, it was really exciting. What has been the reaction so far since Tribes has officially been out?
The response, well, obviously the game scored really, really well.
Yes, it did.
I believe we ended up with an 87 on Metacritic, which is kind of unknown territory for free-to-play games. The game does very, very well still to this day. We actually just went onto Steam with Tribes, and we're looking at concurrent players, which you can see on Steam of, I believe on Steam we're looking at 4,000 to 5,000 concurrents, and that's just people accessing the game client through Steam. So it's doing well. The population is growing and thriving, and our competition side is doing really well. We have the NASL finals, obviously, that we were talking about earlier, coming up, and we have all kinds of awesome stuff. We just got done. Really, this is kind of the capstone event for what we were calling the Summer of Tribes promotion. We have some more kind of other smaller things going on for the duration of the summer period. But this was kind of the big hurrah for our teams. The outside of that, I mean, it's gotten really, really good. Kind of as an esports guy, as kind of a biz dev. That whole we're a tiny company, so it's the land of many hats. But kind of like the game kind of sells itself, to be honest. It's so high fidelity, it's so flashy, it's so fast and fun, and obviously skill oriented. Like, you don't really have to sell there's really enough gap between like pub players and competition players to make a game out of it, right? Like, that's kind of one of the concerns of many leagues is like, is there enough skill differential, right? It's like, you don't have to sell that with Tribes. Does it have a visual language that explains the game? You don't really have to sell that for Tribes. The hardest thing is team size, right, with sevens, but and that's purely from the competition side of it. I mean, outside of that, in the public play space, it does very, very, very well. The biggest problem with the game, I would say, in terms of reception, is it's just very hard. Like, it's a hard game to play. You have to invest some time into it, and it helps that it's free to play, right? It reduces the barrier to entry there. But some people just never are going to be a Tribes person. It's just that kind of game. It's kind of like early MOBA, right? Like, teaching people to like MOBA was like impossible until League of Legends came around. So I think we did a pretty good job of bridging that gap, and the numbers are backing that up. So.
Well,
couldn't be happier.
One of the unique things about Tribes is the movement and how to kind of master the skiing, when to use the jetpack, and once you're able to kind of really understand how the movement flows in the game and the importance of speed, it really starts to get really intuitive. And that's what I found coming back to Tribes. Like, oh, I remember how this works, and it started to get easier and easier, and all of a sudden I'm top of the boards per match, just getting the most kills. And it's so satisfying when you land those the spin fuser on people like directly in the air.
The midair.
Oh man,
midair spin fuser.
But it's like one of the greatest moments in gaming, man, when you're able to do
one of the best feelings. Yeah,
it is awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you brought up MOBAs, and I want to bring up Smite, and we're going to go more in depth about Smite later on. But from a business standpoint, what was the inspiration to create Smite?
So Smite started as early on was actually a derivation of Global Agenda. It was going to be a MOBA-esque arena battlegrounds of Global Agenda. I mean, this is kind of like all like drawing board stuff, but that's kind of the start of it, right? It was like, okay, let's start experimenting with this kind of tower defense-y lane-based, maybe minions, maybe not, using Global Agenda stuff, see how it goes. And then one day we got new direction from our management, our executive team, which was, it's going to be gods, right? And this was before it was Smite, right? This was like, figure out the branding, but it's going to be gods. And the reason that gods are so appealing is that gods are, of course, there's no licensing to gods. They're pretty much like, you don't really need to build like, oh, why is, just pick a character random, like, what's a pudge, right? No one knows what a pudge is when you just say pudge. Well, many people do, I guess, because Dota's such a big game now, but, like, but people know when you say Zeus, they're like, oh, that's the lightning guy, right? I mean, it has a little bit of, you have a little bit of built-in brand identity and you have like no problem with, in terms of like IP with the characters, and you kind of have that, in a way, an infinite list of things that you could draw on. We have 6 pantheons in the game, but that doesn't mean that that's all we're going to stick with, potentially. So I think that was inspiration for Smite, was that, one part of my CEO is a big League of Legends player and big MOBA player in general. And so it was one of the things, he likes to do things that he likes to play, which is where Global Agenda came from. Yeah. Right? Global Agenda is kind of this mashup of like Borderlands and TF2 and Tribes and kind of all mixed together in this MMO world. Where Smite is a mythology meets MOBA, which was 2 things that he was very interested in at the time. So, and still is, right? So that's really where Smite came from, was like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if? Which is actually how a lot of games get started.
Yeah, that whole kind of, somebody thinks, wouldn't it be sweet if we had this, and then they create it. Now, you did bring up some really interesting points when it comes to culture and how things are already embedded in our culture, and then you can build a game off of that. And when I first learned that Smite was going to have different gods and I could play as Hades, that was the first character I chose. And my buddy Wigan chose Zeus, so we had these Greek mythology brothers tag teaming it up, man. It was a lot of fun. We were able to come back, too. It was a crazy game. I believe somebody from Hi-Rez was playing Arachne. And
oh, God, it's probably me. Sorry.
I don't know who it was, but they were dominating, but we stuck with them. We were actually able to come back in the end. It was like a 35, 40-minute game. It was a lot of fun. So Hi-Rez Studios is classified as independent, would you say? An independent developer, an independent publisher?
Yeah, that's right.
You guys are just straight to the consumers. You don't go through a large publisher like EA or other kind of publishers. What are the advantages of being your own publisher, being an independent developer?
Well, outside of kind of the just straight fiscal concerns, right? Like with a publisher, they take X% of your revenue. And so the main advantages are any arbitrary deadlines that are placed on the development process, or any kind of requirements or any checkpoints, right, actually come from internally. So it's like, we want to make these goals and we require that these benchmarks be hit, not that. And even if you have a great publisher, there still is this kind of assumed disconnect by the development staff that your publisher doesn't know what the hell they're talking about.
Exactly.
Right, so even if you have this publisher that's like sitting next to your development staff, like literally like your publisher stooge sits right there and is like, yep, I think we can do this in 2 weeks, they're going to be like, oh, publisher doesn't know timelines, right? Whereas if it's, the VP of our company saying, you can do this in 2 weeks, then they're like, all right, yeah, you're probably right. It's like that. It's a little bit different. That's one of the biggest advantages, is that you don't have to sell, I guess, as management, you wouldn't have to sell publisher ideas to the development staff. It's really more like our sole investor, CEO, and executive team are like, this is the direction we want to take it. And there's usually lots of internal buy-in because we are, a pretty small company. We have, pretty good channels of communication. So there's not a lot of infighting and need for internally branding, internally selling things. That's one of the biggest advantages as a publisher. And that is, of course, outside of purely like we get to keep all of our revenue.
That's a big advantage.
And we don't get like marketing materials dictated to us. For instance, if we had a huge publisher, like my Twitter account would have to go through PR.
Yeah.
Because we self-publish, it's kind of like I do my own thing, and it's great, right? We don't have some of like the large company concerns, like we're worth billions and billions and billions of dollars. So if someone sues us, it could be a huge problem. we're worth millions and millions of dollars. So if someone sues us, we can, I don't know, evade it or something. I mean, but that's kind of the ins and out of it, is that you get a lot more freedom self-publishing, and you get to keep more of your money.
There's some really good advantages. Plus, the internet and broadband internet allows you to put your product out to the public. You don't technically have to print discs anymore, which the publisher helped kind of front that cost, as they said, you know, okay, we'll take a percentage of the revenue, and this will cover the materials needed to get your game out to stores, to ship it, and all that stuff, which was, you know, very costly back in the day.
That's exactly right.
I remember how big those boxes were for PC games. I mean, there was, you know, you could like...
That Warcraft battle chest, baby.
Yeah, it was huge. And then they became smaller, and now to find a PC section in a video game store, they almost laugh at you.
Yeah,
you know, where are the PC games?
Yeah, all they have is like the 1,001 casino games and Office Max.
Yeah, exactly. But it's such a great time to live in for independent people. I mean, you know, even myself creating a show, everybody is able to access it. And that distribution system of the broadband internet, I think some people, some suits, you could say, or large companies are afraid of that, because they're starting to realize we are going to lose a huge chunk of our profits, because more and more people are realizing they don't have to use that product anymore. They don't have to use that method of getting their product out there. But are there any disadvantages of being independent?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's... It's kind of the other side of the coin of what we were talking about, right? Mm-hmm. It's not having that enormous multinational company as your backbone. So if I want to go contact, say, a chief editor at IGN, right? It's not a matter of going to my publisher and saying, hey, I need PR to do this. Here it's like I go ask my buddy Gabe, who's our PR guy, I say, hey, you know anybody in IGN? He's like, yeah, I know this associate editor. Okay, well, let's talk to him and see if we can get in contact with this guy, right? It's a little bit, you don't have that kind of giant corporate entity to fall back on with those kinds of B2B connections. And business to business. You know, I'm sure that the audience of this isn't like, you know, like me and you know, strategy nerds. At least not in the business sense, probably in the RTS sense, but they're probably much better than I am with APM and StarCraft and everything. But right, so it's like, you know, having a big publisher, right, you get those kind of business connections, and you get, like, if we were published by, you know, say Ubi or EA or one of these enormous companies, right, it would be nothing to be, you know, in every magazine and to be in all, and have lots of video content and be on G4 and be right, and those are things that small independent studios, one, maybe can't afford, and two, can't necessarily afford to get those connections, right? Like, they would have to send me and my PR staff everywhere, every event, to meet everybody, right? Whereas, you know, you have people like, for instance, like, I don't know, like Kim Rom, right, for SteelSeries, their director of marketing, who is just everywhere, and everyone loves him because he's an awesome guy. But that's because SteelSeries is a very large company, and they have a big, you know, revenue stream and corporate entity behind them. And as an independent developer, you don't get that kind of safety net, so to speak. But you also don't. It's weird, right? I think as a big subsidized studio from a large publisher, you're kind of like sitting on this, like, I don't know the analogy, but it's like they're holding out this piece of cardboard that's very, very stable, but at any point they can just rip it away too, right? It's like you're never gonna like fall off because there wasn't X there from the publisher necessarily, but they can just pull all of the support if they want to. You know, you hear horror stories about studios making games that publishers just decide up to never release because, oh, it's not the right time, or, oh, let's hold it until this new hardware comes out, and then the new hardware comes out later than expected, so the game never comes out because now it's old news, right? So those are kind of the issues you don't have to deal with, but you also don't get the upside, which is large cash flow, you know, kind of like the whole like idea of like expense accounts and travel and you know, these big event budgets and these huge kind of marketing pieces and connections. But I think that I prefer the independent side. It's just less bureaucracy and red tape.
There's a huge infrastructure that's built when you do go through a large processor, or excuse me, a publisher. But we're seeing more and more games that are pushed out of these publishers that don't have heart. They're being created just for the revenue, and they're not. Games should be works of art that people enjoy and remember and have a lot of fun with and want to play with their friends, not, hey, this is the flavor of the month, and then I'm going to go turn it in for a trade-in for $30 and get something else. I mean, yeah, there's certain games like that, you know, certain single-player games and stuff, that's okay, but that shouldn't be the end-all, be-all of every game that's produced by these large publishers. Just, hey, this is a fat cash incentive that we can make quick bank on and create the same game 2 years later.
That's right. I mean, you get homogenization, I think. right, it's like this formula works, so let's do that formula as a sci-fi game, as a fantasy game, as a, as this and that and the other, right?
We're seeing a lot of MMOs kind of follow the same
sure
pattern.
You get all these MMOs coming out that are like, we have 3 factions. That's what we do different. Besides that, it's World of Warcraft, right? I mean, it's like, ooh, yeah, not gonna play that one either. And that's part of that is just my personal, like, I don't really care for MMOs anymore. I just don't have the time. But you do get that. And MMOs aside, I mean, how many like, realistic or near future post-apocalypse shooters are we gonna have, right? It's like everything from Modern Warfare to Spec Ops: The Line. Right, there's like 9 of these games that come out a year, and that's kind of that homogenization of the giant publishers. They're kind of just like, oh, this guy did something that worked, let's do that, right? Oh, Assassin's Creed worked, let's make Darksiders, and then let's also make this game and that game and this game and that game that are all kind of these like partial derivatives of each other. And some of that is unfair to the studios. I mean, it's these little studios inside of these giant corporations that make these really great games and have huge ambition for them. Sometimes it goes really, really well, right? Like, what's the name of the game? The little one made Are You Alive? I Am Alive. I Am Alive, right? Like, I Am Alive. Like, this little tiny studio makes this great game under a giant publisher, comes out and does really well, and it's awesome and beloved, right? And then you have these other kind of titanic titles from these massive studios that just go nowhere, and like most recently Kingdoms of Amalur, right? Huge amounts of investment in that game.
Yeah. And
it just ultimately didn't do enough things differently or better than anyone else, right? It was just like very safe. A very, very well devised combat system, but beyond that, kind of an MMO game fit to a console. So and those are the kind of decisions that a publisher may force a small studio to make. Like, I know that you wanted this game to be X. However, you need to be done in 9 weeks because that's when we're lined up for everything to go out. You have no more money. Here's when our promotion schedule. So I think that's a scary part of working for those giant companies.
The same thing we have seen in movies, too. I mean, look at A Bug's Life and Ants. I mean, it's the same kind of concept. It's about bugs, and you see this repeated over and over again. Somebody has an idea at a studio, they pitch to the studio doesn't want it, but then they go and hire a writer and pay them half the price they would have bought that script, and it's something similar, So people, they want to be safe. They want their money to be safe. If somebody really loved Call of Duty, then they're really going to love this game because it's a FPS game and it's a war game or warfighter game. Because of popularity and what works, right? But that sort of safety inhibits creativity, I think, sometimes.
That's true. And it's more interesting when the studio says, hey, people really like this element of this game, let's incorporate it into our game, versus when the publisher's like, you're making a Call of Duty, but it's going to be called Medal of Gears or whatever, right? I mean, it's like, that's a much better feeling, I think, to the consumer. It just feels more organic when the publisher... Or I'm sorry, when the developer's like, let's rip that off, than when the publisher's like, you're ripping this off. Because that kind of like squelches all the creativity. Where if you decide like, let's make a game very similar to this one, your developers can still buy into it and have lots of creativity around how they want to twist that formula versus being pigeonholed into having to use it.
Exactly. You want to be kind of inspired by other successes, but then make it your own.
That's right.
It's unfortunate sometimes we see games that are so marketed and so hyped, and then we finally play and we go, this was better 2 years ago when it was a different iteration or something. But let's talk about PC gaming right now. Let's talk about Steam. Tribes is on Steam. What sort of advantages does this offer, and was it a difficult process to get Tribes onto the Steam library, the Steam store?
So the advantages that are offered by Steam, and this is kind of like a great segue from the last conversation we had, which is this developer versus publisher kind of debate, is that Steam is like kind of the perfect middleman. I, as an independent developer, let's say Hi-Rez aside, let's say that Bart makes a crappy Flash-based game in which, it's basically Centipede or something. I can put that on Steam, and that's digital distribution, right? I will reach all of the multi-million Steam users, and they will see it. And if I, have a good relationship with Steam and maybe, pay them some money for marketing, maybe I'll be on the front page for a couple days. And then my little tiny game that costs $10,000 to make, and I put $20,000 into the distribution and publishing of it, could make me $100K, right? And before that just didn't exist for you. It was like, go to my crappy website that I made on GeoCities and see if you can, you know, and see if you like my game, right? You know, like it was going to like events and handing out business cards and hoping people went to it.
Yep.
Instead of just like, here is this like super organic way for users that are interested in action puzzlers to find my Centipede ripoff. Right? Like that's the beauty of Steam. And so for Tribes, it was a matter of, you know, getting it to those distribution channels. Like, when did it make sense for us as a company to open up the Steam? And we got to that point internally. We felt comfortable with the game and with this the state it was in, the progression, the retention of the players, as well as, you know, the kind of, obviously as a publisher, Steam does take revenue from you. So if someone buys something in my game, I don't get 1 for 1 with that, because that's how Steam makes money.
Yeah.
Right? So there's also that kind of concern as a business. Like, when's the right time to go? Are we growing enough organically? Do we need to, you know, divert some of that money to a larger audience through Steam? So there's all these kind of pieces that are floating around for a Steam release. And is it a difficult process? It depends on what you're trying to do. So for Tribes has Steam library integration and I believe the Steam overlay. Now, Steam Friends can be integrated as well, as can achievements and many other pieces of the Steam functionality. So the more things that you add on, the more complicated that process gets. And I think that's kind of really the answer to that question is depending on how complex you want your game to interact with Steam, it can be very complex or it can be a very easy thing. For us, it was definitely a relatively large undertaking to get Tribes Ascend on the Steam. Yeah.
Do you feel now, if we take a step back and look at what's happened in the last 10 years, last 5 years, some developers were forced to make console versions or to focus more on consoles because those were selling more. Do you think it's now flipping back to PC games? Do you feel developers are more able to create successful PC titles? Or are they going to be forced to integrate or use console systems within their development process? Because I feel in the last 5 years, some games have been hindered because the publishers have forced them to go console first and then PC second.
I think, well, I mean, you know, looking at kind of the numbers and stuff released by Forbes, I think last week was saying that PC was growing while console was declining in terms of revenue, and PC had actually passed consoles. But it's so hard to say because it's one of those things like, PC gaming ebbs and flows just like the console market does, because once the next consoles come out, the PlayStation 4, the 720, whatever the heck they're going to call them, right, in the next 2 to 3 years, you're going to see those people making that choice, right? It's like, do I spend $1,000 to have a PC that can run everything, or do I spend $300 to have a console that can run everything? Right? It's to a majority of consumers, I would say that's a no-brainer. Now, right now, we're kind of in the golden era for the 2005 to 2015 period, I think, of PC gaming, right? Like, it's growing right now, and it's doing really well. And I think that a lot of people, it's the same conversation you have with any kind of video game space thing. Will it retain, right? Esports. Will esports retain viewership? Will PC gaming retain players after we move into this next gen of consoles? I certainly hope so. And I think that one of the biggest differences is that right now, consoles have no infrastructure to support free-to-play. There's no free-to-play games out on consoles. So that makes the barrier to entry for people that have a PC so much lower. Like you can go out and get a Dell Inspiron for $350, download League of Legends, Combat Arms, Tribes Ascend, Blacklight Retribution, and have enough gaming to last you for years, right? Mm-hmm. In these free-to-play titles that run on these integrated chipsets. So that is kind of the value of PC gaming. As long as that lowest common denominator is so low that people can get into it, I think that it will continue to grow. And I think that the free-to-play model will be the sustenance for PC gaming in the next decade.
I think as well, too, that some developers, or all developers at least, understand, or publishers understand, that having a modding community or the ability for PC games to be modded adds a lot more longevity to the game.
Yes. And
having dedicated servers on PC eliminates a lot of lag issues that we see in console gaming that don't have dedicated servers. I saw that so many times in Gears of War, where the host was just annihilating everybody with a shotgun because they had that advantage.
Right.
And the PC infrastructure, I felt, was always better in terms of competitive play over the internet.
It's crowdsourcing. I mean, it's just always better.
Yeah. Yeah, so we will see, in the next, you bring up a good point with the next generation of consoles. The Wii U, though, when I saw it at E3, that's just more of like party games and playing with your friends, man.
Sure.
I mean, and that's a lot of like the big family advantage, and that's why the Wii was so popular back in the 2000s, because look what I can do with my family. We can go bowling and not leave our living room. And now it's kind of been on the decline, so we'll see what happens when they are released. But you brought up free-to-play. Let's talk about this model, the freemium model. Do you think this will be the standard for all games in the future, or does it work for only a certain type of game or certain type of development style?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think, personally, my personal opinion is that it's not going to be just games. I think that most, if not all, media will be moving primarily into a free-to-consume freemium model. Obviously, outside of probably major motion pictures, feature releases, subscription-style television services, and high-profile, high-budget games like Blizzard games, and maybe Maddens and Call of Duties, and these kind of like insert game here of the year edition sort of games, right? But I think that more and more and more media is going to be moving over to a freemium model where even in television you'll see. I mean, look at Twitch, right? Already Twitch beats out cable television, like routinely, right? Like big tournaments do better than cable shows. So what's the reason that works, right? And it's whole commercial based, free to consume the content, and then you get served ads. So Hulu already does it. It wouldn't surprise me to see more of television moving over to that basic cable style of distribution, because I just don't think the revenue's there anymore for people to want to pay. Like I have no desire to buy a television service at all.
Yeah, I've been out without TV for almost 2 years, and I have no need for it. Seriously, all my shows I watch on Twitch.
Yeah,
I
watch everything I want to watch on Twitch, and everything I don't want to see on Twitch. The only reason I have TV is so I can buy HBO Go, so I can watch HBO shows, not on my television.
Yeah,
right. I mean, it's like I don't even own a TV. Why bother? I have giant computer monitors. That works, right? I mean, it's like it really is. So I personally, a little Kurzweilian, I think, believe that most of our consumer experience is going to be a freemium in the years to come. And I don't see any reason necessarily. There's nothing that's telling me that it's not going to be that, right? Like, I wouldn't be surprised if you go and you purchase any kind of digital media, it's going to be you're purchasing some kind of extra with it, right? Like, you get the thing for free, but you go buy the slip from Best Buy for, whatever, Smallville Season 6, and you're buying the behind the scenes, you're not buying the content.
Smallville, one of the best TV shows of all time. I have to say. I love that show. But even in economics, you have the short tail, long tail, and how the long tail and the distribution service of the internet has provided more growth for the company, more revenue. And when you have 60 people purchasing the short tail, not buying anything, compared to 160 people with the long tail version of buying $10 a month to watch 3 movies, 4 movies, 5 movies, whatever, you have more revenue over time. And more companies are starting to understand that, wow, Riot Games is doing something smart here. And then even with you guys, Hi-Rez Studios, with the free-to-play model of Tribes and the free-to-play model with Smite, is that you have people that are automatically playing the game, attracted to the game, and hey, I want to purchase a skin for $7, $8. You have 100 people do that, that's a small chunk of change. You have 100,000 people do that, that's a successful business.
That's right.
So it's very exciting to see that.
And I think that as more people and more things adopt it, I think that it feels really good. Reoccurring revenue feels really good as a business, right? It's like every day you wake up, you come to work, and if you're Riot, you go, well, we made X $100,000 today. That was awesome, right? It's like every day is release day.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's like, and it's like not these huge chunks of change at once necessarily. I mean, you see these massive spikes when you release new, like, a pack silver skin or something like that, right? But, you get, it's one of those things that allows you, the reason I like it so much for developers and for video games in particular is that it allows you to continue to develop and iterate on your game way, way further than any kind of retail style purchase would. Yeah. Because then it's a DLC thing, and then it's like a hit or miss. Do people really want 4 more maps for Battlefield? Well, maybe, and sure, people bought them, but would more people have bought them had it been an ongoing free service in which you got the maps for free, but you bought all these other things, these dog tags and all these icons and all this stuff that gave the studio the money to make more content as a vehicle to drive more sales of their microtransactions. So you get more as a player, you get more content, so that there's more reason for people to stay in the game and to become peacocks, right? So like as just a normal consumer of the game, you get more value, I think, in this system, as long as it's done in such a way that's not game breaking. As long as you don't. Personally, to me, like the whole idea of renting in free to play drives me nuts. Like you grind out to rent this gun, like you buy the gun, but then you get it for a day. It's like that drives me crazy. So I think that as long as the games are still structured in a way that it's fun first, and then a good solid microtransaction set up behind it that allows you to keep the studio in business, then that's really a great way to do games these days.
Now let's bring up the pay-to-win complaint. A lot of people say, oh, I like this game, but it's pay-to-win. You have to pay money in order to get a good enough weapon or good enough armor or good enough skills or whatever in order to actually be competent or to be able to kill somebody in multiplayer. Is this a valid concern from the community, or is this just a method of complaining or griefing because they're not good compared to other people?
Well, both. I mean, you look at, there's some games that are examples of one side of the spectrum and then others, right? Like you look at a game, and then there's some in the middle, right? You look at a game like World of Tanks, right? World of Tanks is a very like slow-paced, strategic, tactical, both strategic and tactical shooter style game in which you have to hit the guy to do the damage to win, but you can also buy bullets to do more damage, like straight up. Right, so it's kind of like a little bit of both there, and then you have some games, other games kind of in the shooter space where you have to pay for hit markers, you have to pay for body armor, you have to pay to see through walls, you have to pay to rent a gun for a day, you have to pay, or unlock through gameplay. Some of them you have to buy through gold or through paid currency. Some of them, and then some of them are like so prohibitive that it's like, I personally like the idea of permanent unlocks. Obviously, as a business model, it has less high-end potential for crazy growth than something where it's like, yeah, this person, if you want to have the super AK, you have to buy it every day. You get it for 24 hours, and if you want it for another 24 hours, you pay another 99 cents, right? Like, obviously, that's a more lucrative model in potential. But how many players do you turn off by that? Like, they grind out their gun. It takes them 4 days to grind it out, or, 99 cents, and they spend the 4 days, they get it for a day, and then they're like, oh, now I'm back to the doldrums of using the, pea shooter. And I think that my personal experience is I don't really get very much enjoyment out of pay-to-win games. I mean, even that term isn't really necessarily that accurate. There's very few games that actually are like straight up just buy your way to victory. But the ones that are, it's kind of like this. It's a weird phenomenon in which that there's so much hatred and so much like vitriol around that style of monetization, yet they have such massive player bases and people that spend tons of money because they just love it so much. I mean, so it's kind of one of those things where I can sit here and tell you all day, like, no, it's a terrible model. It's not the way to do it. It's predatory. It's worse for the consumer. Yet, as long as consumers continue to like want that, and by want that I mean spend their money on it, then it's gonna stay around, and then you'll have studios like ours who will attempt to continue to pioneer a better way of doing it, which is really started by Riot, which was that you can buy convenience, you can't buy advantage.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, purchases, in my opinion, should naturally give some sort of advantage because obviously you're spending money on something, but it shouldn't be game-breaking. And the buying advantage is that money versus time, or grinding out experience. I could play 30 games, or I could play 18 games, or how many games to get this amount of experience, or I could purchase this cosmetic item right now for a small fee. And to me, man, like, time's limited. So if I got $5 and I want to spend it on that, I would rather do that than have to grind it out for 30 games. But it also depends on so many other factors as well. But I don't like... I feel sometimes people that are introduced to a game that's been out for 6 months, if they feel that they're at such a disadvantage and the only way that they could have any sort of hope in multiplayer is they have to spend $30, $50, that's not a good experience for new consumers when the game's been out for 6 months. But let's shift gears here and talk about...
I see what you did there.
Thank you. Talk about Smite. This game, man, is so much fun, and one cool thing about it is that it's kind of a level playing field right now since it's new and more people are checking it out. But one of the coolest things about it is the third-person locked camera. And this is a truly unique and worthwhile entry into the MOBA sphere. What was the inspiration behind that?
That was kind of going back to, remember I was saying it kind of was this, originally this kind of offshoot of a global agenda style. I think our CEO, who is kind of the seeding for projects, that was kind of his vision, was this action-oriented, third-person MOBA game, right? And in the beginning, it wasn't like, oh, and you won't be able to look behind you, and you won't be able, your turn rate will be, in the beginning, it was just like, make a third person, right? Okay, so let's make a third person. So then you build onto it, and we found out that part of the fun was this limited perspective. And so that became a main feature of the gameplay. That's kind of where that came from, was this desire to take a third-person shooter action-style game like Global Agenda, like Gears of War even, and make it MOBA.
When you play the game, I have this like spidey sense or gamer sense of they're going to be behind me, and I turn around, there they are, and I'm able to get out of there as fast as possible.
Yeah.
I usually play Zeus, and I throw on my Aegis shield to go fast. But that truly changes the game so much, not in a way that makes it completely different from a MOBA game, but it, like you said, an action-oriented scenario or kind of type of feel really, really makes it a lot of fun and really makes it unique. How has the reaction been from the gaming community so far since Smite has been in beta?
Smite's been out of control, man. It's growing. It's spreading like wildfire. I mean, every day I turn on and look at Twitch and check the directory for Smite and Tribes, and Smite's just thousands and thousands of viewers daily. I mean, we're in the top 10 almost every day. People want to watch it. People want to play it. The beta program has gone really, really well. I mean, we're pretty liberal with keys. We were with Tribes as well. It's kind of our style. Is this like early kind of, you can buy in right away, you get this sweet, kind of pre-purchase pack, and you get access to the beta early. It's beta, guys, that kind of thing. Like, don't, obviously some of the stuff's going to be a little wonky, but,
yeah,
we want to get people in early and let them have fun with the game. I mean, and that kind of goes back to what you're saying about our trade shows, right? I mean, it's like, that's our philosophy kind of as a company, is just like, let the people play the games. So our booth at PAX, isn't going to be this giant, behind closed doors sneak peek of,
like at E3 for so many
yeah,
games, you had to wait in line for 4 hours to see a video.
Yeah, that's right. And then it's like, and our booths are like, here's 60 computers that have our games on them.
Yeah.
Come play them. And like, that's like, so for, back to E3, it's like, right, like Recoil, this little like tiny game from this little studio that made trailers before they made games, right? Like, had 12 computers set up, and you went and played it, and I was like, oh yeah, this is a cool game. I'm excited about this. Injustice, right, was behind a 3-hour wait, and I'm not really that hyped for it because I didn't get to see it, and I didn't get to play it. Yeah. And now I'm like looking at a 15-minute gameplay video, and I'm like, I don't know, maybe. But it's not the same thing, right? It's not that same sensation.
I'm super excited about Injustice, but most of it's still a mystery to me. I just saw all the banners, and I tried to go, because I was busy working at the booth, and you were busy working at the Twitch booth doing all sorts of casting. And I went to go check out Injustice and some other things I wanted to see. Like, oh yeah, we just had the final showing, guys. Sorry. It's like, I work with NetherRealm people, guys! They know me! Let me in! But they couldn't, because it was it. That was the last viewing, and I don't know how long the movie was. But anyways, the thing about Smite, though, too, is that having the pre-purchase package, I felt allowed me to really enjoy most of the game, having most of the gods unlocked. And I had to unlock 2 more with I forgot the points system. Favor?
You have favor as the XP, and gems are the purchased currency.
Right. Yeah, and I used my favor to buy the other 2 champions. And all of them feel pretty good, and they feel very intuitive, and some of them are a little bit easier to play right off the bat than others, but honestly, I had fun playing every single one, some more than others, and I've stuck with Zeus so I can just stick with one champion to really get him down and experiment with some builds. Now, if you can't give me a date, that's fine, but are we close to an official release date of Smite?
I don't have a date for you in particular. It's kind of one of those, we kind of tend to move into an open beta. I mean, it's going to go similar to Tribes, I guess is the best way to like kind of say it, is that Usually we have a closed beta period. I think for tribes it was between 2.5 and 3.5, 4 months, something like that. So that's kind of when I would start looking for the conversation around open beta to start. And then I think we were in open beta for about half the time we were in closed beta. So I would say that conservatively, at least certainly by the end of this year, we should be looking at certainly an end of a closed beta, maybe moving into an end of an open beta period around then. But that's all really conjecture. A lot of it has to do with internal benchmarks of where we want to be to get the game into open beta versus release, how many gods we want to have, what kind of features we want to have. So there's kind of considerations both ways, but right now it's kind of like the game is doing so well and people seem to enjoy it so much that we want to make sure that we can deliver more and more stuff. So I think we'll move into the next phases as big milestone features get in.
It's funny that when we think about betas in the past and how they were a little bit more secretive and closed off, and now that we have open betas because of the distribution system of the internet, it feels like most games are just in perpetual beta. I mean, they're still making changes or adding to it. There's not a definitive set close point of this game is done, and there's going to be no new content until an expansion pack. Like, no, they keep adding to it, which I find very exciting. When you guys added that new god in Smite, I went, oh man, I got to try this guy out, which I haven't yet, but I've...
Guan Yu.
I have fought with him, and his sound effects are very cool. Very cool. Yeah. One more question about Smite, and
sure.
This is about the religious figures. Is there a necessity to be sensitive about any religious figures? I mean, we saw a Hindu kind of coalition that was upset with their gods being used in a video game. I'm not Hindu, but I don't find really anything offensive about using gods in ancient culture or even in modern culture to just battle it out. I don't think they're portrayed in any way that would kind of take away from their respective place in our cultural history. But what are your opinions on that?
Well, there's kind of two pieces to it. The first one is kind of what, in terms of like any kind of sensitivity, especially towards, modern practice religions and especially like Judeo-Christianity and these kind of like these and of course Muslim and these Abrahamic and David-esque religions and all this stuff, right? Is that one of the things that we focused on when selecting gods and deities and demigods and all these things to put in the game is that we want the gods to have a rich battle kind of culture and tradition behind them. So to do something like put in, a very, peaceful Judeo-Christian god or goddess or what have you, it's not quite, it doesn't really fit into the game. I would say having Cthulhu is more likely than having, Muhammad.
Yeah.
Or anything like that, right? I mean, it's just like, and that's kind of why a lot of the Hindu gods are kind of these gods of war, gods of battle, right? That have these very rich and very, interesting kind of things that let you build a battle god, so to speak, out of, right? Same with Zeus, same with the Greek stuff, right? And they have these much more kind of lively traditions behind them, whereas much more of the modern gods are much more of that sun god style of kind of like, guy who sits in the sky and watches over you.
Mysterious, so detached from humanity kind of experience.
That's right. So that's kind of like, I think like the Titans of Greek mythology are a more likely candidate than some kind of modern religious figure. In the same way that like the flying spaghetti monster, right, isn't necessarily while being a hilarious and awesome internet mimetic, pseudo religion, isn't really a battle god and wouldn't really make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Even though it's completely safe, right? Like, so it's not necessarily a matter of, is this safe? Is it going to offend people? While there is some kind of concern towards being at the very least representative of any kind of god that we will bring into the game, and sensitive to any kind of religious aversion to having that god depicted. Outside of that, I think that it's mostly about kind of the tradition behind the gods and the stories and the character.
Yeah, and most of these gods we've seen depicted in films,
sure.
Even from the Asian type of films with the Monkey King to any sort of Greek films. I mean, 300 Immortals recently have featured these different gods. When it comes to Judeo-Christian figures, most of them are prophets.
That's right.
And Joshua, in my sense, would be one of the most battle themed person in Judeo-Christian history, but he's not a god. He's he's a man. So even if somebody wanted to bring that up, it's like, why don't you use Judeo-Christian things? I think it's a good argument to have of what is a battle figure in those different cultures. You said there's going to be 6 pantheons total for Smite?
I think there is currently.
Okay.
Chinese, Hindu, Norse, Greek. Maybe only 5 then. Maybe only 5 right now. Okay. I don't know. I mean, it's really not a set number, to be honest with you. It's kind of like, here's some pantheons that we started with and we kind of identified, okay, yep, let's do these. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to have, Aztec or Incan gods or...
Now, oh man, dude, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent.
Right, like anything, right?
Yeah.
Like, it could be that. It could be, there's a whole kind of Viking religion, right? Mm-hmm. There's all of these, there's myriad of religions and gods and deities and, battle legends and all these things, right? I mean, it could be, like I said, Cthulhu, right? Yeah. Lovecraftian pseudo-god. Why not? Like that's kind of our feeling is like in terms of like religious integrity, it's not so much that as it is like being respectful and depicting a god in the light in which they're kind of deified in their own story.
Yeah, what their legend is, not making like a machine gun Jesus or something. That's just
right. We're not going to have Raptor Jesus, but
Raptor Jesus.
We may have something else that's pretty awesome. Yeah. Like a Quetzalcoatl, like a, Ender of Worlds style god from any of the Eastern religions.
The Aztecs, the Olmecs, the Incas, they all had a lot of different legends themselves that we really don't know because they were of the New World. And in our research, when I talk about research, in the Western culture understanding of what existed here in this hemisphere for thousands of years is still being investigated and discovered. And there's a lot of really neat stories behind that. So I would like to see some champions in that pantheon of the Western Hemisphere sort of Aztec, Mayan, Olmec. So now we're talking about NASL, my friend. This event you and I are both very excited about.
Yes.
Tribes is going to be there. $10,000 prize pool. What is the tournament format as far as team size, maps? Weapons? Is it going to be capture the flag, team deathmatch? What's going to be the rundown? What's going to happen at NASL this weekend?
So this weekend on Sunday, which will be, I believe, the 15th of July, we will be watching the top 2 teams in America that qualify through the NASL Season 3 tournament, Monomaniac Esports and Team Legion. They will be playing 7-on-7 capture the flag, and there is a couple of weapon bans. There are available. The rule set is available on nasl.tv/p/tribes. And off the top of my head, I believe we banned the jackal, the plasma gun, and a couple of the new devices. The short fuse grenades, I think, across the board are banned. Besides that, everything is in play.
Okay.
And the rest of the rule set you can read up on there. And there's a 5-map pool, and I think each team gets a ban. And we play best 3 of 5. I think is how it works. But like I said, all of those rules are available to you to look at there, and we are, and of course our Facebook and my Twitter and everything will be keeping it up to date with everything that you could possibly want to know about our CTF finals.
Right on. Has it been announced who's going to be casting that? Is that public information?
Will be
yet?
Myself and Fishsticks.
Right on. I look forward to that, man. I'll be there in person too, so I get to check it out.
And you'll be doing the all right, moving on to Tribe.
Great. Well. Speaking of tribes and esports, Bart, what is it about tribes that stands out as a first-person shooter and makes it worthy of esports?
Well, I think that the main differentiation point for tribes versus another FPS is basically, let's see what the best way to put this is. If you are an FPS esports consumer, you would be aware of titles like Counter-Strike, like Quake, like Unreal Tournament, Painkiller, those kind of games, right? So if you are completely unfamiliar with tribes, basically the best way to think about it is as if you took the kind of rocket jump, strafe jump style of movement from Quake and you extended that period of like very fast movement out by about a minute. So instead of like you get these very short bursts of fast speed across gaps in like a strafe rocket jump, you kind of do that all the time in tribes. It's it is to an extent a twitch shooter, but it's really more of a movement first game. So the analogy I like to make is that when you look at, you know, kind of legacy FPS esports titles outside of Tribes, is that these games are all kind of these aim first games. Like, you learn to aim and you learn your twitch and you learn to lead on your rockets, on your projectiles. And then what separates kind of the good player from the great players is how well they can move around the map, how their map control is, right? Can they consistently make their rocket jump that gets them to red, you know, those kind of things, right? And versus in Tribes, the game starts out with how well can you move? You have to learn to move around the maps first and master the movement mechanic, which is known as skiing, which is basically a frictionless glide. So if you go down a hill, you know, without friction, you gain speed, and you go up a hill and use your jetpack and you shoot off, right? Like, that's kind of the basic mechanic. You learn to do that first. And then what separates the men from the boys is accuracy against targets that are also moving. So that's kind of the basic differentiation between that and another FPS. And then kind of what makes it the esport side of things is the amount of coordination and the amount of kind of skill gap there is between a top tier team and a team. And the things that these guys are able to pull off within the game world are drastically different than anything you'll see in another game, right? Like picking up a flag, throwing it in the air to someone who just bailed out of a plane to pick it up going 300 kilometers an hour, who then rocket jumps and lands on his base half a mile away, right? Like, you don't see that in other games.
Yeah.
That happens routinely in Tribes, in high-level play. So you have this like super high-flying, super fast-paced, high-action, intense, team-based gameplay. And that's what makes it exciting as a spectator sport. Now, whether or not it's an esport or cyber athletes or any of that kind of stuff aside, it's fun to watch people do things that are outside of a normal game's operation.
Do you think, with the speed of the game, that some parts are too fast for a spectator client or people to understand what's going on? Or is that your role as a caster to explain exactly what's happening so they can be caught up? Maybe not exactly moment for moment, but you give them a breakdown later on of what just happened. It's
always your job as a caster to do that. I think that's what makes, and you know, that is what separates a good caster from a mediocre caster. You know, it's you know, 3 parts enthusiasm and 2 parts game knowledge and 10 parts ability to convey what the hell's going on the screen to people who have no idea what you're talking about, right? Like, there's so many casual consumers. Evo had 100,000 people watching it last night, and probably 11,000 of them had ever watched a stream before or something. You know, like, that's of course arbitrary, but how many people out there that were watching that were actually versed in Street Fighter, right? And or in Marvel. I guess Marvel had the biggest audience of the night, but you know, that's kind of it's the caster's job to build the hype and to explain what's going on. And for Tribes, it is particularly challenging because you are playing with 14 players on the map. They're large maps. People move very fast, but if you can break it down, you know, through your language and presentation in such a way that it's okay, it's not actually a 14-player map. It's actually 3 defensive players on each side, plus a sniper, plus 3 offensive players, and one of them is the flag capper. So let's take a look at, you know, really kind of explaining what's going on. A lot of high-level views tend to help, but it is a particularly challenging game to cast because you don't have kind of the benefit of an isometric view or a 1v1 situation like you normally would in an FPS, versus an isometric being, you know, more the strategy style games and MOBAs, giving you a full view of the playing field at all times.
Now, the spectator mode that you're going to use in Tribes is going to be through the eyes of the players?
We have, so in Tribes you have both you have a free roam camera. You can snap to any of the players. You can snap to the flags. You can snap to the bases. You can go up very high. You can fly around, or you can lock onto the players and see what they see.
Okay.
So you kind of have the option to do both. Most of the games are cast in a third-person omniscient style of view where you're flying around trying to get the action. And that goes back to the kind of point I was making earlier, that Tribes is a game more about movement than it is about shooting.
Yeah.
So while it can be interesting to see the guy who maybe is holding the flag versus the incoming offense chain him down with his chain gun, it's kind of a little bit more interesting to see how those 3 guys are setting up a pincer attack, 2 of them, while one guy goes straight through the middle to try to push him into this corner. Right, that's kind of more the story is the strategy than it is necessarily individual player skill, although it is really great to get to watch those guys do that stuff. Like, watch them set up these very, you know, these high-speed flag capping routes using that skiing mechanic, you know, these things that take 45 seconds to set up and take 6 seconds to get home because they're going so fast. Like, seeing where they shoot, do their rocket jumping, where they, land. Those kind of things are also very interesting, I think.
Yeah, it's just like the A-Team. It's not just a bunch of guys shooting guns, but it's a plan. When you get to see that plan executed, it's great. It's great. It's dramatic.
Yeah.
So, as we wind down here, Bart, what is Hi-Rez's esports goals, or just competitive gaming goals, either with Tribes or with Smite? And what are the general goals of Hi-Rez altogether?
Okay. So I think they are one and the same, actually. The company goals are very similar, if not the same, as any kind of esports style goals, which are, we as a studio make free-to-play, AAA style, if you don't want to say we're a AAA company because we're independent, competitive online games. So free, competitive, online. That is like our mission statement, our goals. Everything that we're going to do ad infinitum is going to be free, it's going to be competitive, and it's going to be online. Now, whether it's a highly competitive game like Tribes or Smite, or a, who knows what else will come out with in the future here, but maybe less competitive or even more esports focused, right? Like, it's going to be on that spectrum. We're not going to release a single player physics puzzler. Okay. They're all going to be these, like, everything is going to be geared towards team play, competition, and we will support our titles that have a desire. If people want to play Smite as an esport and they want to have tournaments, we're going to support it. Right? Tribes was a little bit more of a push strategy, like Tribes is going to be an esport, we're going to make it happen. Right? And Smite's a little bit more of a, if the community wants it to happen, we will support it. And that's kind of our vision moving forward is we will release these competitive online free-to-play games, and if people really want to play them and there's a player base and there's a desire, we'll be right behind it to support our game.
Well, Bart, you have done so much, and the years that I've been involved in esports, I've seen Hi-Rez Studios really come into their own as a studio creating Tribes, and now with Smite, 2 games I play on the regular, and it's because of the online competitive feel that I enjoy them so much. But what would you like to accomplish? What more would you like? You've accomplished so much. What more would you like to accomplish?
What would I like to accomplish? I think that I would, if I have not already, my main goal after, it's like getting a taste, right? Like, I got the taste of esports life, and like my goal is now to just do this until I'm dead. Right? I want to be Sir Scoots, just being like, man, I'm lucky. Right? Like, I mean, you see interviews with Scoots where they ask him, like, how was the event for you? And he like gets like emotional and starts tearing up because he's just so stoked to work in this industry, and that's really how I feel about it. Like, I just want to continue to be able to shoutcast and to, it's great to be a personality, and it's great to be, have a bunch of Twitter followers or whatever. Like, my goal isn't to have 5,000 Twitter followers by 2015. My goal is to work full-time in esports until 2060. So that's what I want. I want the scene to grow, and I want to help it any way I can. Tribes in particular is very near and dear to my heart because that's really where I started as well in the old TWL, OGL days of online competition. But I mean, beyond that, and looking forward, to me, it's companies like Twitch and companies like our company and companies like Riot and these kind of pioneers of these new styles and these new competition-focused games as a spectator event is just awesome to me. So I would love to continue to be fortunate enough to work in this industry, and maybe doing things like you do, being an MC or being a shoutcaster or working on the business side. It doesn't matter to me. I just want to be able to touch this industry in particular because it has and always will be my passion.
Right on, my friend. Like I said before in this episode, I've enjoyed the different products that you create. Not only the games, but the casting as well, and I feel that you bring so much energy to everything that you do, and that really translates to everybody watching it. So thank you so much for everything you have done. I really look forward to being able to hang out with you and work with you at NASL.
Yes, absolutely.
To watch some great Tribes action. So in closing, Bart, do you have any shout-outs?
Ooh, shout-outs. Yeah, I do. So I'll be a little bit selfish here and shout out towards some Tribes stuff we have coming up. We do have the NASL Season 3 Finals for Tribes Ascend. Will be at 1 p.m. Eastern, whatever, EST, let's say, on Sunday, July 15th. That's this weekend. I believe this is premiering about 5-6 days before that event. So make sure to tune into that and all the rest of the NASL coverage from the grand finals there in Toronto. And we do have, if you are a new player to Tribes or you haven't tried it yet, we do have some New Bloods, what we call New Bloods tournaments starting up here very, very shortly that will allow you to just get in and get some prizes and have fun with the game, find some people to play with, and get out of the public game hell, so to speak, and into some more organized play, if that's what you're into. Some people love just going and, pub stomping. Some people want to play with other like-minded individuals. That stuff's starting up as well. If you guys need me for anything, I do work with all of our titles in the competition manner. So Hi-Rez Bart on Twitter, or bart@hirezstudios.com is my email. You can find me on Reddit. You can find me on Twitch. Everywhere I'm Hi-Rez Bart, so just send a PM somewhere where there's a Hi-Rez Bart account, and I'll see it eventually if you need me for anything. Beyond that, yeah, I look forward to getting to yell at all of you about Tribes here in about a week.
All right, Bart, thanks again so much. We'll see you in a couple days. That's it for us, ladies and gentlemen. This has been Shifting Gears. I'm your host, Clutch. You can follow me on Twitter at Clutch08. Take care. We'll see you at NASL, NASL.tv for more info. See you then.